Yeah, please.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great privilege and an honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Brigadier General David Stilwell. General Stilwell is a true regional expert, a true Asia expert. He started in the Air Force as a Korean linguist, then attended the Air Force Academy. So other than that one bad decision, going to Air Force and not Navy, since then has had a absolutely stellar career with very important assignments related to the Asia-Pacific region. He has a degree from the Air Force Academy in Asian History, an advanced degree, master's degree in Asian Studies and Chinese language. He's had tours in the region, most notably for our purposes today, served as our senior defense representative, our defense attaché in Beijing up until 2013, until the current assignment. He currently serves in the Joint Staff as the Deputy Director for Political Military Affairs, covering the Asia-Pacific region. True to his Air Force roots and association, he would probably want me to make sure that I note that first and foremost, he's a fighter pilot, flying F-16s among other platforms with over 3,000 hours of flying time and several operational tours. So I can't think of anybody better to help us further explore the topic of our program, the Chinese military, the impact it may have on the alliance. And again, we're just delighted and honored to have you, General, and look forward to your remarks. Please help me welcome Brigadier General Stilwell.
Well, thanks for the generous introduction, and it was fortuitous that we ran into each other in the Pentagon in the waiting area. He's waiting for a badge. It's, you know, you think they'd respect your previous time and not leave you hanging like that. Since we're taking jabs at services, I'll leave the Navy alone, but you'll notice my uniform's a bit wet, partly due to my turning the wrong way out of DuPont Circle Metro, but the other part having to do with a Army tradition. Air Force is a descendant of the Army, of even today, not allowing you to use umbrellas. Anybody know why you don't use umbrellas in the Army? Because it scares the horses. So, a little bit, the smell of wet wool, you're far enough away, that shouldn't bother you. As Randy kindly pointed out, I have a decent amount of time in Korea, Japan, and China. My Korea time was 2 one-year tours. Japan was 4 years in the 90s, but most recently 2008, 2010 as the wing commander in northern Japan, where I did get to interact at a pretty high level. And so I think it can help answer questions you might have on force posture in Japan and elsewhere. And then, as you mentioned, in China, where I was happily associated with Miss Kathy Gudgel back there, who, if there are hard questions, I'm going to point to her to answer. And then in this job, I've got about 4 years of continuous time watching U.S.-China mill-mill. That may put me too close to the subject, and so I'll do my best to build some distance, but if you have questions on specifics that, of course, don't violate the confidential nature of these sorts of things, I will be happy to answer them. Just to talk about mill-mill in general, my experience is with countries like Korea and Japan as allies, everywhere from the highest levels all the way down to the 2 captains talking about fighter operations. It's a very cordial and easy relationship. Militaries all do the same thing. Militaries all don't like to see combat break out, because when war breaks out, they're the ones that are dying. And so one of the themes here in U.S.-China mill-mill is that neither side wants to see unintentional conflict, and then I'll talk about some of the things that prevent that. But I was happily surprised during time in China is that when we did get past all of the high-level political, military, somewhat strained relationships, as you finally got down to the operational level, not often, but infrequently when you did, it was very encouraging to see that your counterparts on the PLA Air Force, PLA Navy side, I mean, we all do the same thing. And when we start shooting down our watches, the 2 fighter guys, it's a very positive relationship as we talk about, and especially with the PLA Navy. A tip to my Navy brothers here. Their experience out in the wider world in the Gulf of Aden counter-piracy activity has really given them more global perspective, and interaction with the PLA Navy in particular is productive. In general, the U.S.-China mill-mill relationship since 1980 has been on a decent positive trajectory, not without bumps, but in general, both sides see the benefit of interacting from both sides of the Pacific. U.S. obviously considers itself a Asia-Pacific power, and as the Chinese continue to develop and expand their military, there are increasing opportunities for us to interact, both positively and negatively, and that's, again, what we're going to address today. But the relationship has not been without bumps, and I think Kathy has been around for nearly all of these. 1989, we had the Tiananmen and the sanctions that followed. 99, Belgrade bombing. 2001, a Chinese fighter crashed into a Navy P-8 or P-3. And then 2011, my personal experience after the upgraded F-16 sales were announced, the relationship went on hold. I'm going to come back to that later, though, and talk about how I think the management of the mil-mil relationship has benefited from consistent policy on how we're going to interact. This is not the Cold War. Our Chinese colleagues remind us of that all the time. Trying to put this in light of U.S.-Soviet interaction is misguided. It doesn't help, and it's inaccurate. I think the biggest difference between that, and this is obvious to you, who are far more heady than I am, is the economic relationship and the people-to-people relationships. We've got 100,000 Chinese students or so in the U.S. Even Taiwan mainland relationships continue to grow as the economic links grow, and then the cross-strait relationships continue to grow. Obviously, the security relationship is still tense, but the rest of that relationship continues to improve, and that is to everybody's benefit. So any comparisons of what we do militarily to what we did with the Soviets and things like INCSI, how we're going to minimize potential for miscommunication and bumping into each other, we can learn from those, but we certainly don't want to duplicate those. 2015 is an important historic year for us. We just opened a display in the Pentagon on Wednesday of a bunch of black and white photos from U.S. and Chinese cooperation during World War II, where the U.S., as you are well familiar with, came to the support of the Chinese people in the China-Burma-India theater. As we opened that exhibit, the 70th anniversary issues obviously came to light. And I think the key idea to take from that 7th anniversary is to acknowledge the fact that we did have conflict in the region, but we should also acknowledge that in the last 70 years, our relationships in the region have continued to grow. Our alliances in the region are extremely productive and beneficial. And to Japan's great credit, that relationship and that security posture and those contributions in the region and in the world continue to grow and will continue to grow. I'm going to Japan and Korea next week to continue discussions on the guidelines, defense guidelines, and other things. And like I said, it's a very positive relationship. My 2 years in Misawa, I think, speak to that as well. So although there's certainly a history we need to acknowledge, and we should acknowledge, to include our positive relationship with the Chinese military and the Chinese people, I think we should avoid overplaying the negative aspects and make that forward-looking 70 years as to where it's going to be in the future. So our approach to the U.S.-China relationship, PRC relationship in particular, is forward-looking, and we're considering, as 2049 does, where this is going to be 10, 20, 30 years from now. I'm optimistic. I think all the trends are positive. It's not like there aren't any warts, but the trends and the interaction in this last year for certain have been positive. So I'm going to talk about three things: how we seek to advance this relationship and what our framework is. The first thing we use is sustained and substantive dialogue, not the ship visits and all those things that show up on newspaper front pages, but it's the dialogues behind the scenes that many of you are not privy to. And again, the confidentiality of those dialogues is helpful and useful. But those are the things that, as long as we can maintain them over time, the ability to come closer to an agreement that includes all other allies and partners in the region increases as well. The second area is enhanced risk reduction. Those are talks as well, but they're more practical talks, operational type talks, like the Military Maritime Consultative Agreement, which is where, it's something like what we have with the Soviets, but it's actually far more productive. We talk about the things that went wrong over the last quarter, but we talk about the things that went right too. And we have the ability to share ideas and how we can better manage our interactions on the water, in the air, and elsewhere. So dialogue first, enhanced risk reduction activities second, and then finally, concrete practical cooperation. those are the things that you see. Those are ship visits and exercises, exchanges, and all those other things. Clearly, there's benefit to those to a degree. We have to always factor in the regional partners, allies, and the others as we do that, so as not to create something that looks like a G2 or U.S.-China building a relationship at the expense of others. And I'll say this again, but when General Dempsey hosted the Chinese Chief General Staff, General Fang Fenghui, here last April or May, the discussion boiled down to General Dempsey's reminder that the U.S.-China mill-mill relationship, for sure, is not being written on a blank sheet of paper. That sheet of paper has all of these other historic agreements, 70 years or greater, 170 years with Thailand. All these other regional agreements we have are already there. The U.S.-China relationship is going to fit inside of that, and it's not something completely different and starting from scratch. Okay. I'll get through the details on those three, and then I'll open it up for questions. So under dialogues, that starts at the highest levels at the security and economic dialogue. You've got certainly the economic aspects there. You've got the strategic security dialogue, which is linked with that. We've got the defense consultative talks, defense policy talks. We've got a whole slew of alphabet soup of these talks. And they work so long as they continue. When they break down, though, as you know, relationships are unstable. Relationships aren't in the bottom of a valley and you push them up or you push them toward the negative. They're at the top of a pinnacle. And if you don't manage those relationships constantly, they typically slip backwards. And that's where communication's involved. And again, I think we've made headway in helping the Chinese understand that dynamic, in that when things do happen, like in 99 and 2011, in my experience, and you cut those channels of communication, that now we have miscommunication, misperceptions, we have assumptions made about things that may or may not be true. And so happily, we were able to make the point over time that in September 2011, with the announcement of the upgraded F-16s, there was, the phones went dead. But to their great credit, and to the credit of this continued policy, that we did conduct the defense policy talks with Undersecretary Flournoy in December of that year. And General Ma Xiaotian was her counterpart. And I don't know if anybody has interacted with General Ma, but a true fighter pilot in every sense of the word. They were contentious. There was a lot of one-way dialogue, but in the end, it was a positive example that this dialogue needs to continue. And I do think the record after this last bump in the relationship will carry us through in the future. These sorts of discussions need to keep happening. These give us, these talks, not just DCT, but others, give us venues to have frank and strategic discussions, and then clearly communicate our positions, which continually change. My education in the world of diplomacy, I always thought there were only two sides in any discussion. There are two positions, but there's a third position, that's the background, which is constantly changing. And as time goes on, it allows your positions to vary and often gives you opportunities to let those reach common, or at least observe common objectives, and then enhance things, make things better. So we were able to exchange our positions at that time on strategitic matters that help manage the inevitable friction that we're going to find in this relationship. And I think since this is dealing with Japan, Japan is beginning to enjoy the benefits of those discussions. We have things going on right now, I think, that all see as mirroring. And as we are convinced the Chinese of the benefits of those discussions, I think the Japanese side is able to do the same. So these things demonstrate between us two that constant attention to the relationship and to regional dynamics help manage our differences in a constructive way. The opposite is true as well. If we don't do that, then we start drifting apart until something happens. So the next step after dialogue, which in my world, as again, who flies airplanes and sees black and white impact from dropping a bomb or shooting a missile, was difficult to adjust to the world of high-level diplomatic dialogue. It was like watching paint peel, But over time, after you hear these dialogues then you can do some change detection and hear what goes on. So it's not There's no hallelujah moments typically in these things. There's no great breakthroughs, but over time, the things trend toward the positive. One step down from that, where you do see increasingly positive outcomes, is risk reduction, especially recently. So as we talk to the Chinese about typically, especially right now, confidence building measures suggested by President Xi Jinping, accepted by President Obama. And out of that, we've come up with a couple of measures that were announced in November, dealing with things like rules of behavior on the surface, boat and boat, and then air to air, which we are working through right now. They're non-binding, but they are a good opportunity not only to discuss what we're doing, so as we continue to operate in closer proximity with not just U.S. and China, but with Japan and China, with Korea, Southeast Asia partners, and even globally out in the Gulf of Aden. It helps bring both the U.S. and China to an agreement, and more so the Chinese, as they have been relatively isolated over time, into the international structure, and it helps them understand why we do things the way we do. So it's to use their terms, a win-win outcome in the fact that we're both discussing, talking, seeing the relationship develop, and getting positive outcomes. Bridge-to-bridge communications, that was difficult to do in the past, but now we've had both a proposition on the U.S. side and acceptance on the Chinese side that it is good for ships passing in the night to have a conversation about what they're doing, what their intents are, and all that on outside of territorial seas. So as China continues to modernize and expands its activity outside of the immediate littoral areas, the risk of accidents or miscalculation continue to grow. And that's why I think as we had these discussions last October, as we concluded the maritime activities, there was an education in there for both of us, helping us understand why the Chinese think the way they do, and us explaining to them 200 years of, in Randy's case, maritime activity. So we saw the announcement of those in November, and again, we've seen benefits of them since then. So the Maritime Confidence Building measure now has started further discussions on how our operational forces deal with uncertainty as we encounter each other. It doesn't say that they don't happen. And if you remember, in August last year, we had an unfortunate incident that made it into the media. But because we were talking with each other, we were able to actually discuss why we consider that issue difficult, dangerous, and we were able to enforce the importance of preventing further iterations of that. We have to continue talking about that, though. It's not just going to go away on its own. And on that point, since, again, I wear wings and talk about it, fighter aircraft are a unique platform. For folks on boats in the bridge of a ship, it's not like it's just the captain up there driving the boat by himself, although I'm sure unoccupied craft are in the future somewhere. But there's a bridge full of people who it sort of damps down any sort of showboat activities. But being a single seat fighter guy, I can tell you that it's great having three dimensions to maneuver in. It's great showing your buddies just how great a pilot you are. We've all seen Top Gun. There I was communicating. Frankly, the Chinese have seen Top Gun, and if you've seen the movie Jinsher Chuji, that has the exact same scene, communicating. And so it's not unusual that those sorts of things do get reflected in actual operations. Now, if it's happening on one side, that's okay, but when it's happening with another country's assets, there it becomes problematic. So fighter aircraft, as we talk about air-to-air interactions, the confidence building measure, this is one of those really weird issues that we do have to talk about, is the notion of having one guy, one airplane, no supervision, interacting and sometimes communicating with others. So these are things that we're doing to help damp down risk, unexpected, unintended consequences. Last one, building capacity for cooperation. Drink. So our cooperation with the PLA right now takes place in 5 areas: military medicine, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, search and rescue, counter-piracy, I mentioned already, and then peacekeeping operations. These are areas where we can cooperate fully, and we don't have to, there's without any restrictions, concerns about, transferring techniques, tactics, and procedures that may not be helpful. The policy surrounding these things can be difficult to understand. It was tough for me at first, but I think I get it now. Because in my mind, engagement was a light switch. You were either embracing them fully and showing them everything, or you weren't talking to them. But there are ways to do these things that are subtle, nuanced, and guided at the highest levels that help us bring the Chinese into the existing. As I said, it's not written on a blank sheet of paper. There are some who question the benefit of these sorts of exchanges with the Chinese in light of their on and off regional behavior with respect to their neighbors. I understand that, and I think I can explain how that policy works. But these are the sorts of engagements, this mill-mill, are actually the smallest part of the greater U.S.-China relationship. I mean, as we know, the greatest part of that relationship is the economic part, and generally that's positive. As we work through a number of things, WTO years back and such. So the mill-mill relationship in this regard isn't that large, but it is a large lever. And prior to 2011, the Chinese used that lever to communicate that they were political displeasure. Since then, we've used it for, I think we've put it to better use than that. We do continue to engage the Chinese in all venues on their regional behavior. We're not saying we're accepting it, but we have the ability through these mill-mill channels to discuss it. But there are also diplomatic and other activities going on to discuss things like South China Sea land reclamation and other things. And we've been publicly and privately vocal about this. Third, Chinese inclusion in these cooperation areas and bringing them into regional security structure demonstrates there's a seat for them at the table, that they're not being held out, that we do encourage positive cooperation. And I don't think anything represents that better than the Gulf of Aden counter-piracy activity. They have just as large interest in preventing commerce from being hijacked and destroyed, or mariners being held ransom or killed, as anybody, because as you know, their trade, their economic viability is largely dependent on free flow of goods and services through the South China Sea, Straits of Malacca, and all the way out to the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Aden. So again, these are areas where we're happy to include China to pick up part of that security burden that we all share and we all have interests in. So from our perspective, there's two key reasons why it's important for us to work together, exercise together, to build these discrete areas of practical cooperation. We need to demonstrate to the region and the world that the U.S. and China are actively working to build on areas of common ground, common understanding, as we address increasingly challenged global security problems. And they are coming around. Second, we build familiarity and awareness between our forces as we exchange our processes and practices to strengthen our capacity to cooperate. That capacity is important, and we're seeing positive growth there too. As we respond to international, like we said, peacekeeping, humanitarian assistance to disaster response. These are areas where we need the Chinese and others to all join in a global response. As a result of all this, we believe, and we've communicated multiple times to the Chinese, that the current scope and range of areas in which we conduct these activities together is currently sufficient. It's commensurate with our level of actual cooperation on real-world events. That is to say that we're happy with the way things are. And the Chinese understand that position for the most part. So in conclusion, and happy to take questions, this mill-mill relationship is a important and useful tool in the larger bilateral U.S.-China relationship. And it's useful in building trust and stability. And it also demonstrates that we're actively working together to resolve our differences. And we're working together with allies and partners as well to help the Chinese understand how these areas, where we can work together more constructively in these areas. The relationship allows us to work together to manage competition through sustained and substantive dialogue, like I talked about, through working through risk reduction, and then through visible practical cooperation. And finally, this activity takes into account China's dynamism, its growth, its desires to be seen more as a global player, and provides China the opportunity to participate in the international order as a solid contributing member. And with that, I will terminate my comments and let you maybe stand up and stretch and fight off that post-prandial lethargy or food coma as we know it, and happy to answer your questions. How are we doing on time?
General, thank you so much for those remarks. The General has generously agreed to be on the record, which we support since we're a think tank dedicated to public education. But please understand that also means that he may be constrained in some of the answers. We'll see. We'll test him on that, but please understand those conditions and be respectful of that. With that, open the floor, please. Do you want me to field or Scott?
General Scott Harold from the Rand Corporation, thank you for your remarks today, sir. I'd just like to ask you, there are many areas where the United States would like to have a dialogue or have a more rich and fulsome dialogue with the PLA. Many of them are areas where we have concerns about China. The underwater domain, activities in the air domain, space, cyber, nuclear. I wonder if you could just describe for us your view of Chinese interactions in dialogues with the United States about getting to formal dialogues on that, and are you optimistic that we, after last year's progress, may be able to build towards cooperation in those areas, or at least dialogue in those areas? Thank you.
Thanks, Scott, for that. I can speak primarily to the military side. You know, I see the others from the periphery, and I think most of you see those as well. And I did talk extensively about the military part, but you asked about several domains. Air, obviously, we're working through right now. Dealing with the East China Sea ADIS, there was some greater understanding required in how that operates and where that goes. Interaction between, as I described, single-seat fighters and those aircraft. So the air part, I think, is going quite well, and we're seeing progress on that. Underwater, honestly, I can't recall, having actually discussed that. I think we deal with that in the maritime domain primarily. Space and cyber, that's a huge area of concern. The level of discussion right now isn't quite where we would like it to be. As we've seen with the maritime and the domains I'm familiar with, as China's interaction outside of its borders grows, it's beginning to see the utility of cyber. And you've seen that in the headlines recently, is they are beginning to understand more about IPR protection, about the need to manage cyber activities on both sides and all those things, space to the same degree. And then in nuclear, can't say we're seeing a whole lot there. Obviously, we're pushing for it. We'd like to have more. Thank you.
Hi, General. Thank you for doing this. My name is Nadia Chao, Washington correspondent for Liberty Time Taiwan. I think a few weeks ago, China announced a new route across to the middle line of Taiwan Strait, even though Taiwan expressed dismay and protest. I wonder, from your point of view, will this complicate the military contingency in Taiwan Strait? Many people, mentioned there will be a coming election. Tension might raise again in Taiwan Strait. In the past, we know there were military exercise, U.S. dispatch carriers. For U.S. side, will there be any, exercise or contingency this time? Thank you.
To the question on Taiwan, the air route, the newly announced air route. These are things that help bridge the gap between the Taipei and Beijing. It started off, to me, at least from where I was, as a negative thing. It seemed like a jab, but I think in the process we've actually seen some dialogue on that and able to come to a conclusion that helps both sides. So, as problems arise, they can either be treated one way or the other. You can go at them all negatively, or you can treat them as an opportunity to dialogue and discuss and come to a common understanding. I think this is an example, the air route, of both sides be able to come to a reasonable conclusion. As far as elections, again, that's outside my lane. I can't, I don't have anything to say on that except that the trend has been positive. We're not going to see another 1996 type of statements, I don't think. And as far as preparing exercises and carriers to the straits, that I can't. We don't. There's no need for that. With the elections, the trend has been positive. We haven't had any problems over the years.
Thanks for your remark, Mr. General. 반갑습니다, 장군님.
Chairman.
William Kim from Voice of America. Two questions. U.S.-China dialogue. Does U.S. military have close dialogue with China's PLA regarding North Korea's contingency scenario? If it's not, would you tell me what's the obstacle about that? And the second, your boss, General Dempsey, is going to visit ROK soon. So would you elaborate what's the visit goal and agenda of that? And also the missile defense system, THAAD is now pretty controversial in South Korea as China openly criticized and objected the goal. So would you elaborate what's the why the THAAD is appropriate for situation in Korea and technically, not politically? Thank you.
Thank you for those hard questions. As far as the North Korea issue between the U.S. and China, yes, that is certainly a topic we discuss at length. Obviously, it's important because both sides stand to suffer from any sort of nuclear accident or the loss of control of those nuclear capabilities. And thinking through, trouble on the peninsula is trouble for everybody, not just for South Korea-U.S. alliance. I mean, it means issues for the Chinese as well. North Korean missiles also create demand for missile defense. And you see the Korean government itself is developing and thinking through those processes. THAAD is a key part of that, an area defense that provides greater security, both for the Republic of Korea specifically. So those are all areas where our discussion with both China and the Republic of Korea on this trip coming up are very important, and we will be discussing all those things. Thank you.
Steve Winters, a local researcher. I wondered what your impression was of this idea that maybe the younger or middle rank Chinese PLA officers have a more nationalistic bent, perhaps, or more perhaps impatient with China being recognized for what it is today. How do you view that playing out as we go forward?
So the mid-level officer question is one that I've been particularly interested in. Like I said, when we get together with our counterparts, not at this level, but at the 03, 04 level, the folks doing the work, there is a certain sense of, like sizing each other up. But, once you sit down for lunch and have a conversation, either hopefully somebody on one side of the table speaks the other language, but as you have that discussion, you can just see the eyes clear and realize he's just me in a different uniform. And it's, again, very positive. The internet has been both a help and a hurt in that regard, where you can selectively find articles that reinforce your position, whether it be super nationalistic or maybe broader. This is an area, though, where Mil has great potential to help. And like I mentioned, the PLA Navy example, there are a lot of exchanges that go on with the PLA Navy, not just the U.S., but with lots of countries as they do port calls elsewhere. And they begin to understand the greater world, the greater setting, and this nationalistic drum beat gets damped down a little bit. So,
General Dennis Blasco, is this on? Yeah. I also served under Kathy Gudgell's leadership a while back. As we know that PLA operations in China, U.S. military operations in China's EEZ has been one of the three obstacles that the PLA has mentioned for some years now. Have you seen any changes in the PLA's emphasis on that obstacle since they've started bringing their own AGIs into our area, EEZs? And then finally, have any Chinese government vessels of any color, white or gray, been involved in harassment of civilian commercial vessels transiting either the EEZs or the South China Sea?
Sir, thank you for that question, and I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. Your book reads like a how-to manual, and I read it from memory before I went out there. So the U.S. EEZ position, as China begins to understand the necessity for, they just begin to see our position clearly, more and more clearly as it goes, then the importance of defining clearly what territorial waters mean and what you can and can't do in accordance with the law of the sea and all those things becomes a more, let's say, rational discussion and less of a boilerplate thumping on obstacles. So that is to say that if you're in RIMPAC, it's hard to, I mean, you can still parse that, but in general, it makes the discussion a little more friendly, if that helps. And as far as activities in and near China with respect to civil shipping, I don't know of any. I haven't heard of any. I don't think so. It doesn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense. Thank you.
If we go quickly, we might be able to get two in.
John Schlissel with Johns Hopkins University. So I was wondering, we talk a lot about military-to-military capacity building, and I know one of the answers to this may be lanes in the road, but what about paramilitary capacity building, specifically the Coast Guard, which is kind of half military, half police, and using them for capacity building with some of our allies in the region, like the Philippines,
Right.
Vietnam, et cetera?
That's a great question. It's one of those areas that's kind of untapped, especially in the terms of dialogue that we haven't quite seen much of. Although we do find that the Whitehall world tends to be a little more open to discussion and conversation. That's not to say we're not having concerns in that regard as well, but we do see more, and I don't, again, this lane thing, but talking to folks like APCSS out in Hawaii, we do have a more, say, productive discussion with them. The lanes of the road on the U.S. side and the Chinese side are probably one of the concerns, though, is that we may have a little bit better coordination on our homeland security and DoD aspects of our regional waters and such than the Chinese do. I think they're addressing that, though. So.
Okay, we're going to try last two, Dean Chung and John Zhang, please.
So Dean Chang, Heritage Foundation. A two-part question, very quickly. The Chinese, of course, were invited to RIMPAC in 2014. Should we basically expect that they are now a permanent part of the RIMPAC series for the next however many biennial RIMPACs? And along the lines of that, of course, reducing tension, as the Chinese have said with Dan Blasco's question, is reducing SROs. Has there been any effort on the part of the U.S. to reduce SROs in China's EEZ as part of confidence building measures, separate from what the Chinese would like to have us do?
Thanks, Dean. And to your first question about RIMPAC, Admiral Greenert, I think, said it best, is, right now we're assessing what we want to do in RIMPAC. As you develop the scenario for each of these events, it's not like the entire, every country in the Pacific shows up. You can't exercise every possible naval capability in each of these. So you specialize and you specify. So as we build out the objectives of each one of these, that drives typically who you invite and then also the interest level of those who want to participate. So we haven't, that's kind of where we are right now with that. As far as SRO reduction, that has not been discussed, and certainly not directly. Obviously, the allergy to that exists, but as was mentioned earlier, Chinese are also beginning to understand the importance of that ability, the ability to conduct those activities in international airspace, to conduct them safely, not just the U.S. near them, but them near neighbors, right? Because they have intelligence requirements as well.
Your last question.
John Zan, excuse me. John Zan with CTI TV of Taiwan. Thank you, General. This is actually a follow-up question to an earlier question by Nadia. The Taiwan Strait has been calm for many years now, thanks to the efforts by Taipei, Beijing, and Washington. But with the next Taiwan presidential elections, taking place less than 10 months, with the DPP, the opposition party, poised to win, is the United States military prepared to revisit the kind of tension that we saw in the 1990s and during President Chen's term of office? Are you already starting to talk to Beijing and probably Taiwan about measures how to reduce that possibility? Thank you.
That's a good question, and clearly my Taiwan colleagues are obviously concerned about this eventuality, but honestly, this is the first time I actually heard this discussion. So I think that's an indication of where we sit on this particular subject. It's a political issue, but as I mentioned earlier, in the Cold War framework, where there was really no economic relationship, both the U.S.-China relationship and the Taiwan, the cross-straits relationship is, and I'm preaching to the choir, but from my perspective, is regulated by other interests, not just the military security. You've got economic ties, you've got people-to-people ties and all those things. So in my humble, limited perspective, I don't see that as a significant issue. But I'll leave that to the experts. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking General Stilwell for an excellent presentation. Really appreciate it. Ian Easton is going to chair the next panel, so we will move seamlessly to that and look forward to that discussion.